What follows is another installment in our Rust Belt political series. Those are states in the Rust Belt: Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and if I left anyone out, Pennsylvania. We've not had any debates from Pennsylvania, but those races are pretty much, as one would say, pretty much determined in those states. Now, Michigan, I almost forgot Michigan. We'll give you some polling on Michigan before we finish here. This debate was held in, Westville, I believe, Indiana, between Mike Brim and Mr. Donnelly, Joe Donnelly. He's the current senator from Indiana. Mike Brim is a Republican type. And they also had a Libertarian in there, Lucy Benton, I believe it was her name, was the third person there. Now, this was a well-managed debate. It was by the League of Women Voters, the the Indiana, I get my states right a minute here, the Indiana Political Commission, I believe it was, and they had an individual from the... let me see if I can get it here. From the university, Ann Ryder. She's a senior lecturer at Indiana University Media School. So it was a very well-run debate. I was very impressed by it. We covered quite a few debates. We are working here from the Indianapolis Star in Indianapolis, Indiana. Let me just start this off here. Democrat Joe Donnelly, and he used to be a sheriff evidently, and Mike Brim spent Monday night Senate debates attempting to paint each other as partisan extremists, taking issues from abortion to health care to Kavanaugh. Brim reiterated a number of times about the Kavanaugh nomination and what it meant. This is from Mr. Senator Donnelly. I was on the stage 6 years ago. I remember that we covered that race. Richard Murdoch was extreme, Donnelly said, but Mike is actually more extreme because he thinks he should be in the middle of a decision for your wife and your daughter when their lives are at stake. This is the abortion can be terminated because of rape or incest. Brim described himself as 100% pro-life, including opposing abortion in case of rape, incest, and to save the life of the woman. That is extreme. And Donnelly, one of few anti-abortion Democrats left in Congress, made exception in these three cases. Donnelly is a moderate Democrat. He's not a pro-choice Democrat. Braun accused Donnelly of untenable fence straddling. You can't have it both ways. Braun accused Donnelly of doing whatever his liberal leaders. This is the old Nancy Pelosi card, but instead of Nancy Pelosi, he uses Chuck Schumer here. His marching orders, in Brim's view, would include Donnelly's vote against the confirmation of Kavanaugh and to preserve Obamacare. Donnelly launched his own attack. Both Donnelly and Brim campaigns claimed victory immediately after the debate. In our opinion, based upon old standard debater points used to do debating, Donnelly won the debate. Brim, what he did was he just brought up various points, and he reiterated his points, such as the marching order, such as the Kavanaugh confirmation, his endorsement from DJ Trump. Now, this was on the Westville campus of Purdue University, Northwest, known as the Boilermakers. And this is Mike Donnelly talking here, launched the attack against Brim. And Mike, you need to do more than take your tie off. That's kind of interesting there, too. He was more, this is Mike Brim, was more into Mike Braun, I don't know why I'm calling him Braun, he was more into theatrics, trying to identify with the working man. He owns a logistics company, that's what he does. And he was also in the state legislature. Now, the Indiana state legislature. What is interesting here, Donnelly had been there 6 years, and evidently Donnelly had also been in the House as a Washington type, tried to label him that. That's standard. You had many of the debates that we cover. And then he went on to label him as the least effective Democratic senator and criticized his, well, we already ran on to Kavanaugh. For Braun, for Donnelly, he said he passed 45 pieces of legislation. Now, those are that became a law. Suicide prevention in the military to allow parents to try experimental drugs. One of his accomplishments there. Now, a lot of senators will sign on to a bill, but they are not the sponsors of the bill. Donnelly, that is, defended his vote on Kavanaugh, saying the judge didn't demonstrate the correct temperament or judicial impartiality. Mike Braun, who was for Kavanaugh on the first day, Donnelly added, if President Trump had put Bugs Bunny up there, old Mike would have said he should be on the court. Braun, in turn, accused Donnelly of working with Democrats to obstruct the nomination. The confirmation vote was delayed in the Senate. It was delayed at the request of the American Bar Association. That was after Dr. Christine Blasey Ford testified about a sexual assault back in the 80s when they were, of course, both teenagers. Democrats, including Donnelly, will do or say anything. That's been a standard campaign, as far as campaign rhetoric, for a very long time. Will say and do anything, period. It's a blood sport, and as long as you like that, you will have decisions made not of what Hoosiers want, but what Chuck Schumer wants. It's kind of interesting here because Donnelly, Braun is basically running as a Trump man. So he will do what DJ Trump wants, basically speaking there. You can tell we don't care very much for him. Lucy Brenton was an interesting person there. She was a libertarian. She repeatedly brought up cannabis as a crop, growing a cannabis as far as the land is concerned, which that is correct, than a corn that is normally grown now in Indiana. Senator Donnelly lamented the fact many times that he had worked with Trump on Neil Gorsuch. He voted for Neil Gorsuch because he had the proper quote-unquote temperament. Now, as far as defending the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, he also wanted to make it clear that he cast the vote to preserve Obamacare, and he was one of the deciding votes. The late John McCain was actually decided. More specifically, it guaranteed coverage of pre-existing conditions. Braun wants to remove that. He would actually, and he signed on to various lawsuits to declare the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional, which is whistling in the wind. Braun never directly addressed the lawsuit, but he said he supports repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act with measures also guarantee coverage. Now, this is a big lie the Republicans have been telling. What they had done was they sponsored what so-called skinny insurance type of policies that would be determined by various states. In other words, you'd have 50 different state insurance commissions, and thus insurance companies would not have to guarantee some of the rights under Obamacare, including pre-existing conditions. So these are common lies out there. He's been hammered on that. That is old Braun on that. And one of the things Donnelly kept referring to was places where he had been. Where he was at Nobleville West that afternoon, he said, referring to a school shooting that occurred. I was with the family and the police. Now, Braun was talking about the National Rifle Association. They didn't get into that very much there. And the Iran nuclear deal, that's a situation that probably many people did not pay attention to. The candidate, of course, they only lightly touched it in terms of foreign policy, and were very well informed and not to, because most people didn't really know the Iranian agreement. But Senator Donnelly pointed out that under the agreement, the U.S. government, actually bought 10 years, period. And by buying an additional 10 years, according to the information he presented, the Iranians were a month from developing a nuclear launch device. Thus, that bought that, but now that next month the agreement will be canceled, they'll go back to the drawing board, and also sanctions on Iran will revisit them. Many of the petroleum outlets, companies, have ceased operation there, and basically they're on a sanction level now, and the Iranians are pumping less gas. Now, this is a state in 2016. I wouldn't look at this too much, but DJ Trump won by 19 points. A lot of these states, you got to remember now, this is one of the states that in 2008 Barack Obama won Indiana. He did not in 2012, but he was the first Democrat to win Indiana, I believe, since Jimmy Carter, perhaps. If it wasn't Jimmy Carter, I don't remember if Bill Clinton won Indiana or not right now. Indiana used to be known as Red Indiana. It is kind of split up. It's a state that has marked all-out battles there. The Chief Justice Roberts is from Indiana. And I'm trying to think of I can't think of a recent Supreme Court justice from Indiana. But that is the land of Birch Bayh. They've had senators in Indiana that have been progressive senators, but it's been a very, very long time. And they had Senator Lugar from Indiana also, that was a moderate senator there, and he was denied his renomination in Indiana. Now, this Braun character is from Jasper, who served in the Indiana General Assembly. Incidentally, a fellow that a scholar that we follow, E. Jordan. He wrote the classic Business Be Damned. He was out of, at the time, Butler College, Butler University. When they have the March Madness, you will often see Butler University there. Let's look at some polling very quickly here, and we'll end this. We'll return, incidentally, later in the morning, with Friday Java. Every Friday we have Friday Java, on WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network, part of our weekly magazine show. And we'll be talking about the Rust Belt and about polling. We'll visit the people at the University of Virginia, Charlottesville. And, of course, we always remember Heather Heyer. Let me just quickly get the polling here from Real Clear Politics. I'm not certain. I've looked over this from the last few days. If we have an Indiana race here or not. We don't. We'll go over it later and get it. Let's see. We do have some Friday polling here. I won't go into it very much, but out of Texas, we have Cruz up by 8. Out of Tennessee, it's Marsha Blackburn in the state of Tennessee, leading by 14 points. Now, this is New York Times center poll here. And we have out of Atlanta, Georgia, the Atlanta Constitution, between Abrams, an African-American woman, and Kemp. He's up by 2 points. That's kind of interesting in itself. And let me see if we have anything out of Indiana. I don't think we do. We have something out of Wisconsin. Tammy Baldwin's up by 14 points. Debbie Stabenow, is up by 9 points. And down in Texas, Cruz is up by 9 points there. And Elizabeth Warren, our own Elizabeth Warren's up by 25 points. We usually don't call states of this nature. And that was, let's see, Mitchell, wait a minute, hold on. No, wait a minute here. Mitchell Research, I thought it would be. They're out of Detroit area, a solid poll. And we have an NBC News poll, has Evans up. That's in Wisconsin by 10. And we won't go into that one. That's a later deal there. Some of these are runaway polls out of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have Baker now up by 39 points. I think that's extreme. And try to get to see if we have anything out of Indiana. It appears some of these states, we just don't have a lot of polling in them, period. I did see an Indiana poll, but it's been back several days. I looked back to Tuesday, but the last poll we actually saw, Donnelly was holding his own there, and I just don't see anything here from Indiana. I'll have to look. We have a list of somewhere here of the Senate. Oh, we did. We probably don't. I was thinking we did have the Senate up here, but let's see if we have anything here. No, we have nothing out of Indiana. We'll go to Senate poll. This is real clear. Looking back through October here. Oh, we do. Okay. Donnelly's up by 2. Now, that was a Fox News poll on the 4th of October. And we really just don't have very much here. The average is plus 2.5 for Donnelly. There was an NBC poll, but that was way back in August. Donnelly was up by about 3. So that's really all we have for polling. We go now to the Purdue University Westville campus and the debate between Senator Donnelly, Mike Braun, and a lady calls herself I Love Lucy, the Libertarian candidate. And we'll see how it turns out. Very good debate. A very, very good debate. Mrs. Ryan does a very good job in this debate. Good day. We'll see you on Friday Jobber.
And next, the Indiana Senate debate between Senator Joe Donnelly and his Republican challenger, Mike Braun. We're going to be live right now from Purdue University Northwest in Westville, Indiana. This debate, courtesy of Indiana Debate Commission. Our live coverage begins now here on C-SPAN 2.
Live from Westville, Indiana, the U.S. Senate debate, sponsored by the Indiana Debate Commission.
Sponsored by the independent, nonpartisan Indiana Debate Commission. We are coming to you live from the Dworkin Student Activities Center on the Purdue campus Northwest in Westville, Indiana. With me here are the 3 candidates on the ballot. We have incumbent Democrat Joe Donnelly, Republican challenger Mike Braun, and Libertarian challenger Lucy Brenton. The winner of this election will represent the people of Indiana in a 6-year term in Washington. I'm your moderator, Ann Ryder. I am a senior lecturer at the Media School at Indiana University in broadcast journalism. I was on the air at Channel 13, WTHR Indianapolis, for a long time, and I'm a member of the Indiana Broadcast Hall of Fame. For the next hour, the candidates will debate unscripted some of the issues, a variety of them. Nearly all the questions came from you, the voters, and we have members of the public here who submitted questions to the Indiana Debate Commission, and they are here to read their questions in person. None of the questions nor their topics has been shared in advance with any of the candidates. So now it is my pleasure to introduce you to the candidates. Lucy Brenton, the Libertarian, is a finance professional of Indianapolis. She ran for the U.S. Senate in 2012. In the middle is Joe Donnelly, the Democrat incumbent who is completing his first term. He was elected to the Senate in 2012. And Mike Braun, an auto parts distributor of Jasper in southwest Indiana. He won the Republican primary in May. At this time, the candidates can further introduce themselves and make a 1-minute opening statement, starting with Mrs. Brenton.
Thank you and welcome. My name is Lucy Brenton, and I'm the only reasonable candidate for United States Senate instead of the two bickering old parties. Tonight, you're going to hear a lot of things that you've heard before. You're going to hear that we're supposed to keep sticking our noses into other countries' business, but you as the taxpayer have to pay for it. You're going to hear that they want to build a wall, not me. I want to build bridges. There are 3 things that our country needs right now. First, we need to protect individual human rights so that we can pursue happiness on our own terms without government interference, as long as you don't hurt anybody else. Second, we need to protect individual economic liberty so that you have the right to earn a living without the government regulating and taxing you to death. And third, we need to leave this world a better place for our kids. Polluters must be stopped. I dream of an America where everyone feels comfortable and welcome, where you feel free to be yourself. They want to tear this country apart. I want to bring our nation together. Please allow your friends and invite them to follow me at #ILoveLucy.
And now we will hear from Senator Donnelly.
I love Lucy, too. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. This election is about who do you trust to have your back in Washington. Since I've been senator, we've had 70 consecutive months, every single month, of increased job growth. I was the final vote to save health care. If you have sickle cell, if you have diabetes, if you have a child with asthma and needs an inhaler, I saved their health care, not Mike. Mike increased taxes 45 times while in the legislature, the largest tax increase in Indiana history. At his company, the deductible on his health care is $10,000, which is completely unaffordable. He has every time tried to take away pre-existing conditions coverage and supports a lawsuit today that would do that. Additionally, he wants to cut the defense budget, and he was against a raise for the troops. Mike, you need to do more than take your tie off to gain the trust of the people of Indiana.
Mr. Braun, you are up.
Thanks for hosting the debate, and thank you, Hoosiers, for tuning in. I'm Mike Braun, a lifelong Hoosier. I'm a job creator and a political outsider. I'm running for this because I'm fed up with business as usual in D.C. Running for the Senate should be something that you do where you bring something to the table. And career politicians say one thing and do another. I moved back to my hometown, took on tough issues like health care, held premiums flat for 10 years while covering pre-existing conditions. So when I get there, you can count on me to do things, and he's running a campaign of negativity because of his record. Wrong on the Iran deal, wrong on health care, wrong on almost everything, including Judge Kavanaugh. When you send me there, you can count on I'll stand up for Hoosier values, and you're going to need to look at leadership and trying to change the dynamic of a broken system. Thank you.
Thank you. And we start with the Supreme Court, as you might imagine. But first I want to preface it. This is from the Indiana Debate Commission, this question. Division and animosity in Washington and around the country is at the highest level that many people can remember. In fact, some people think it has not been this polarized since back to the Civil War. So candidates, the country just emerged from a bruising fight over the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. It was a fight across ideological lines that highlighted the growing Me Too movement, as well as the demeanor of judicial nominees. So what lessons did you take away from this battle? And I start first with Mrs. Brenton.
Thank you. And thank you to the Indiana Debate Commission, Hoosiers Watching, WTHR, and all the fine stations and internet streaming that's carrying this. I'll tell you what I learned. I learned that it doesn't matter whether you wear red or whether you wear blue. They want control of you. The division is not over, civil rights or any good issue. It's really over who gets to control this country. And you can see that whether you're on this side of the aisle or that side of the aisle, the complete focus is on controlling the tax dollars that flow from people. So what needs to happen in this country is we need to come to a baseline of love and harmony, and we need to take away the issue of them trying to control us. It's us versus them.
Mr. Donnelly?
I voted against Judge Kavanaugh because of concerns about his impartiality and concerns about his judicial temperament. But I voted for Justice Neil Gorsuch, President Trump's pick, because on the test I have, which is about judicial temperament and impartiality and qualifications, Judge Gorsuch covered all of those. I've been for 77% of President Trump's judicial nominations. 62% of the time I've voted with President Trump. And so my job is not only to determine the nominee, but to protect the court. And Justice Gorsuch met every test. Judge Kavanaugh had concerns about impartiality and about judicial temperament. Mike was for Judge Kavanaugh on the first day. If President Trump put up Bugs Bunny, Mike would have said he should go on the court. Our job is to protect the court and to put people on who are qualified.
Mr. Braun.
So this will be a clear separator between me and the senator here. When you had a judge with his qualifications, there was no doubt that he is not going to legislate from the bench. He's not going to do the things that courts have done for a long time. Very well qualified. But I think what you should have gotten from the recent spectacle there is that the Democrats, including Joe Donnelly, will do or say anything when it comes to their political interests. It is a blood sport. And as long as it's like that, you're going to have decisions made based not on what Hoosiers want, based upon what Chuck Schumer wants. You're going to need somebody that leads and thinks independently. Joe's been there for 12 years in Congress and the Senate, considered the least effective Democratic senator because he never sticks his neck out. He blows with the wind. And in this case, he made the wrong decision on Judge Kavanaugh.
Rebuttal is on an as-needed basis, and the candidates are going to indicate when it's very important to them. Mrs. Brennan, you were first up to indicate.
Yeah, thank you. I think as a female, it's important that I stand up here and stand for women, that we should be believed when we come forward. But just because we're women doesn't mean that we are automatically telling the truth. What I'm seeing here is a lot of partisanship. I've had my Me Too moments, but when I looked at this through the lens of logic, I asked myself, would Judge Kavanaugh be the type of judge that would uphold the Constitution? He is a co-author of the Patriot Act. He is no friend of the Fourth or Fifth Amendment. I would have been no from day one.
Mr. Donnelly.
The person who's saying anything is you, Mike. You say you're to protect pre-existing conditions, and at the same time you support a lawsuit to take it away. You say you're for lower taxes, and you voted for the highest taxes in Indiana history. You say you're for the troops, but you're against a pay increase for the young men and women from Terre Haute and Richmond and Muncie. I was for Justice Gorsuch. I've been for almost 80% of the judges, but we're not there as a copy machine. We're there to be a help to President Trump to make the best decisions.
Mr. Braun, do you wish a rebuttal? 30 seconds.
I want to make this clear. When you have a senator like this that keeps repeating falsehoods, it's a sign of a campaign that's circling the drain. I want to make it clear. I would never be for not covering pre-existing conditions. I've done it in my own business. The senator gave us Obamacare, which has no choices, is in falling apart. That's what you get from a career politician. When you have a leader, somebody that does things in the real world, you can hold premiums flat for 10 years. And my insurance is good and much better than the failed Obamacare plan.
I would like to ask that we all try to stick to the question at hand. We are going to get to a lot of the issues that you just mentioned. Just a reminder, and that is not against any particular candidate. We do have our first voter here, and we're so glad we do. The first member of our audience to ask a question is Terry Krause of Elkhart. She's a business owner and doctoral candidate at Purdue University. Mr. Donnelly, you will be the first to answer her question. Have at it.
If elected, will you commit to carrying out the will of the people, even if it means going against your own party?
Well, I go against my own party all the time. I went against my party when I voted for Justice Gorsuch. I've gone against my party, rounding up all the Democrats to be for right to try when there were none for it. And I was able to rally all 50. So we were able to make sure that our children got health care, that we had right to try, that people in difficult medical situations could get coverage and life-assisting medication. So that's a regular for me. I've been with President Trump 62% of the time. That's what we're supposed to do. I don't think it's about party. Mike couldn't even name a single Democrat when he did a forum in Indianapolis. He may have Googled the name since then, but at that time he couldn't name a single Democrat to work with. I've passed 45 pieces of legislation, and each one had a Republican partner. 23 with President Trump, so count me in.
Mr. Braun.
Okay, very clear. It's his record that we're litigating this evening. And when you try to turn attention to other issues, it means that you're probably embarrassed about your own record. I want to make it clear. He voted for Obamacare originally. He voted against its repeal. He voted for the Iran deal. He voted against tax reform. And for any enterprisers, that was the one that really made a lot of difference. And then here he voted against Judge Kavanaugh. He says for other reasons, but he did it because he takes his marching orders from Chuck Schumer, the same guy that's been running his campaign from afar. And when you'll do that, and you've got a record that says you're the least effective senator, my goodness, why don't we give a chance to other people that have done things in the real world? I took on the insurance companies when nobody else would. It may not be the perfect plan, but it's a great plan. And I held costs firm for 10 years, and I'll know more about what to do to actually reform health care than a career politician that gets briefed from the lobbyists.
15 seconds, Mr. Braun. Would you commit to carrying out the will of the people, even if it means going against your party if elected?
I would. The key thing about a leader is you think independently. And if you look at my record, I've done that when I was in the state legislature. I've done it in my business. And a record speaks for itself. Joe has gone there, gotten cozy for the perks and the pay. He's not led. That's the difference between me and him.
Mrs. Brenton, same question that Terry asked.
It's going to be an awfully long evening if we just simply listen to them repeat their commercials back and forth to each other. Thank you, Carrie, and congratulations on your PhD candidacy. I'm a little bit torn as an IU grad, but let me answer that question. The Libertarian Party is a set of political beliefs and ideals, and we look through the lens of something very simple. We demand all of our freedoms all of the time. We demand a return to constitutional values and restrictions because the government is supposed to have a muzzle on it. That is the purpose of the Constitution, to allow maximum freedom. Please read the 9th and 10th Amendments for more information. Would I go against my party? Yes, absolutely. But I don't believe that I'll have to, because the lens that we look through is not left or right. The lens that we look through is one of being fiscally conservative and socially accepting, to be able to allow people the maximum freedom with really just two things in mind. Don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. Other than that, you're good with me.
We have another voter lined up, but you indicated, Mr. Donnelly, that you would like a rebuttal on this.
Yeah, Mike talks about effectiveness. He ought to talk to the veterans of North Central Indiana who have a brand new VA health center that we all work together on. The veterans in Terre Haute who are going to be getting a new VA center in the next year or two. He ought to talk to Laura and Jeff McClin, whose son Jordan has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And because we worked together, we were able to pass right to try legislation that President Trump personally thanked me for and said what a great job we did. He ought to talk to Justin Phillips, who we've worked together on to stop the opioid scourge across our state, that we've gone to place after place to end it. That's effectiveness.
All right. Let's go to our next voter. This is William Eckerly of Monticello. He works in customer service, and he has a question.
Who is your role model in politics and why?
And for this one, we start with, Mrs. Brenton again.
Thank you. You know, I'm often torn about who would be my role model in politics, simply because there are so many different people that you can admire, and not always for the right reasons. For example, I admire President Lincoln. Why? Because when a woman said to him, President Lincoln, you've got to destroy your enemies, his answer was simply, Madam, I'm going to make my enemies my friends. Does that not destroy my enemies? But he had some other issues as well. I guess really the question becomes, is there anyone worth admiring? The last politician in modern days that I really admire was John F. Kennedy, because he took a stand and he said, you know what? We're the greatest country in this world, and what we're going to do is we're going to put a man on the moon in 10 years. And we don't know how we're going to do it, but we know that we're going to do it. And it's that sort of inspirational leadership to which I aspire.
Producers are telling me that, Mr. Braun, you should have gotten the first go of that. So why don't you answer next?
Okay. So, role models. I'm doing this from the outside, and when you've got so many career politicians there, it's hard to find them. But I'll give you one. He's not in the Senate anymore. Tom Coburn, a doctor from Oklahoma. And what I loved about him, he was never afraid to bust the government. The government that Joe's been a part of for 12 years, that's given us $1 trillion deficits on top of $21 trillion in debt. He was honest. He would speak up. That's what you're going to get out of me. I signed a term limits pledge. I think the problem with our country is we get people that go there for the wrong reasons. Start calculating their vote to get reelected, like the senator here, and whoever gives them a campaign contribution. Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, thank goodness, outsider businessman. Small businesses would have been left out in the cold when we did tax reform. He stepped up. I didn't hear this senator's voice because he never speaks up, doesn't want to shake things up. Ron Johnson, I respect. I look forward to serving with him.
Senator Donnelly?
Mike, you may want to know Ron Johnson was my partner on the right to try legislation. He and I were the two senators that President Trump congratulated and said what an awesome job that we did. And if you'd like me to pass on that you like Ron, I'll let him know. My friend, my mentor, my hero in politics, John McCain. John McCain, who spent over 5 years in a Hanoi prison cell. John McCain, who fought for his nation at every turn. John McCain, who when he ran for president, his motto was country first. And that's what this should be about, is our country. Is about how to make it so that for our children and grandchildren, we leave them a safer, stronger America. And in life, it would be my dad and Father Hesburgh from the University of Notre Dame, where I graduated. Father Hesburgh told me, Joe, when you go there, don't do what's easy, do what's right. And I followed that advice every single time.
Mr. Braun, rebuttal?
Okay, great example here. He talks about right to try. Great piece of legislation. Everybody was for that. The tough ones are when you got to stick your neck out on a major piece of legislation, and you got to be willing to buck your party boss, Chuck Schumer, who tells, I think, the senator what to do on all the important legislation. If he was friends with Ron Johnson, why wasn't he speaking out on tax reform? That was the biggest piece of legislation for small businesses and individuals when you believe in keeping more of your own. That's where you want a senator to speak up, not on something that everybody thinks is good.
Mrs. Brenton?
You know, as long as we're on the subject of right to try, let's talk about right to try cannabis. Let's talk about not doing study after study to determine the effectiveness or safety of cannabis. I've got great news for you. It's been studied for about 10,000 years throughout human history. And how many people have ever died of a marijuana overdose? It's the exact same number as have been gored to death by a unicorn. 0.
Mr. Donnelly, quick rebuttal, if we can. We really want to cover all these issues.
I will.
Okay.
Look, I was against tax reform because it exploded the deficit by $2 trillion that our kids are going to have to pay for it. Mike got a wheelbarrow full of cash in that tax reform. He got a huge tax cut. And the kids of LaPorte County, and the kids of Du Bois County, and the kids of Posey County are the ones who are going to have to pay for it.
We're going to move on to climate change. I'll tell you, we received more questions on this than any other topic. UN scientists just came out yesterday, said world has 10 years to get climate change under control or face dire circumstances. Right here at Purdue, researchers have projected that our average temperature will rise 5 to 6 degrees by mid-century. So this question was put in by Lee Eman. He's a retiree in Bloomington, very open-ended, and he asks, what actions, if any, should the U.S. government take to address climate change and global warming? We're going to get back on track here. Mr. Braun, you get to start.
Thank you. Climate change, a steward of the environment. I'm again going to bring talents to this discussion because I've been a steward of the environment for a long time. started the Ecology Club back in high school. That's unusual to hear out of conservatives. Been a steward of managing land in a way that I understand the real issues. Always going to be, all of us want clean air and clean water. But you got to have common sense. You can't do what the Democrats did and started picking winners and losers by trying to prop up industries that may be part of the long-term solution, but that's the way government works. And when you try to pull the rug out from underneath other industries, and again, that's the way big government and bureaucrats work. When you learn it in the real world, you know the way to do it. And we now have got energy independence, and that has got to be always taken into consideration while you're keeping the environment in healthy condition. I've lived it, and that's why I know what to do.
Mr. Donnelly?
You can't trust Mike to fight for Lake Michigan. You can't trust Mike to fight for our rivers. I wish you were still in the Ecology Club, Mike, because we need it now more than ever. Look, I am all in for American energy, for ethanol, for our farmers. They're having huge struggles with tariffs right now, and their prices have gone down. We need to make that ethanol market even more available and be used more for wind, for solar, for clean coal. If it's made in America, we want to use it, and we want to make it so that we have a cleaner environment. We have a sacred obligation to our children, to everybody who's watching out there, to turn over to you a planet and a country and a state and a lake and a river on the Ohio River that's cleaner today than when we first found it. And that's our job, and that's what we're supposed to do.
Mrs. Brenton, climate change.
You know, the problem is with corporations and government regulations, which actually give permission to the corporations on how much they can pollute. I've been boycotting Nestle since 1993. Why have I been boycotting them? Because they're a horrible company, and as Senator Donnelly just alluded to, they're actually draining Lake Michigan and selling it off to the Chinese. This is absolutely ridiculous. We don't need more of this in Washington. We need people that actually stand up for what's right, that will offer real solutions. For example, we need a global cleanup effort to get the plastics and dirt out of our ocean. We need heme iron to seed our phytoplankton so that they're able to actually clean up the oceans for us. We need hemp. Oh my gosh, did I talk about this 2 years ago or what? We need hemp, we need hemp, we need hemp. Why do we need hemp? Because it fixes carbon. Why do we need hemp? Because we don't need ethanol. That's just another government boondoggle that pays off his cronies.
Actually, we do need ethanol.
I think we need hemp.
Mr. Braun, did you want a rebuttal on this, Mr. Braun or Mr. Donnelly?
I just wanted to say, look, we're Indiana. We fight for our farmers. Ethanol is a clean fuel. It's an extraordinarily good fuel. It is something that makes money go in the pockets of our farmers instead of the sheikhs in Saudi Arabia or in the Middle East. I'll fight for our guys on the farm every single time, or women on the farm every single time.
Okay, let's keep it moving. We have some rebuttal. Mr. Braun?
Okay, quick rebuttal. When it comes to energy independence, where were Democrats and where was the senator? President Trump came along, and now we're an exporter of energy. And I think the big difference in this debate and in the approach is, do you accept the things of the past? The senator has been running for office or serving in it for almost a career. And you've got to accept.
That's just not true.
You've been there 12 years. And
I've spent lots more time in the private sector than in public office. And you know that.
You can interrupt if you want.
Mr. Braun, you've got 10 more seconds.
Yes. If you don't get people in there that think differently, expect more of the same. I'm going there because folks have been there a long time and they've delivered us these results. He's shirking it. He's part of the problem.
Okay, we're getting off track a little bit. Mrs. Brenton, you indicated you want a very quick rebuttal.
I think I may be the only one standing up here that has an organic garden and that composts and recycles and does all that good stuff. Maybe Senator Donnelly does as well. Here's what I know. I know that we have some of the richest soil in the world, and we're wasting it on corn. We could have a much better crop that is already pesticide resistant. We don't have to keep putting dicamba and 2,4-D on our playgrounds or on our corn. We need to protect the Hoosier environment and stop polluting it.
We have another audience member with a question. Mike Dugan is a student at the University of Notre Dame. Mike.
Hi there. Do you believe that the central holding in Roe v. Wade, that women have a constitutional right to an abortion, is correct?
Mrs. Brenton?
Of course. Start with the woman. If any of you have read my biography, it's probably not a stretch for you to understand why I'm pro-life. I've given birth to 10 human beings, and now I'm a grandma of 2. So when you ask a question like, is a particular Supreme Court decision right or wrong, we've got to ask yourself, is who are we protecting? If we don't protect the smallest, most helpless individual, then we're on a downward slide into euthanasia, into killing off our old people so that Social Security doesn't go bankrupt like it already is because there is no trust fund. So the question is, should we or should we not have Roe v. Wade? That's a question for the Supreme Court to answer. And all of you that are worried about Kavanaugh, you can keep worrying about it, because he's not strong on your 4th or 5th Amendment rights either. He's probably not going to be strong on that.
Senator Donnelly.
I don't have a litmus test on that, but I will tell you this. I'm a pro-life senator. I have every single time made sure that federal funds were never used for abortion-related services. And I believe in a stance that protects all life. But I also believe it's important that for our moms, for our sisters, for our wives, for our daughters, that we have exceptions. I believe exceptions in the case of rape, and in the case of incest, and in the case of a mom who may lose her life because of the pregnancy. I was on a stage 6 years ago where they said Richard Murdoch was extreme. But Mike is actually more extreme, because he thinks he should be in the middle of a decision for your wife or your daughter when their life is at stake. And I just don't think we have any place in that discussion.
Mr. Braun?
I am 100% pro-life. And when it comes down to just trying to nurture life in general and take us from where we are currently, all I can tell you is I got the endorsement from the Indiana Right to Life, the National Right to Life, the Susan B. Anthony Group. And this gentleman here has got an F rating. So when he says he's pro-life, I don't think you can have it both ways. I would never demonize anybody that disagrees with me. And, I'm open-minded in the sense that anybody can have their opinion, but you can't have it both ways, Senator. And I'm the one being endorsed by the organizations where they know where your heart is.
Senator Donnelly, a quick rebuttal if you...
It's not having it both ways to make sure that your daughter or your wife, when they're given the most tragic news, and I see doctors in the audience, the most tragic possible news that they could lose their life in this pregnancy. That's not our place to tell that woman or that family what to do. Mike, that's not our business, and we shouldn't be in the middle of it. And it's the family's decision with their pastor.
Mrs. Brenton?
Just a quick note. I faced this decision as a woman. Here's what you need to know. It's no one's business but the person whose body it is. We must each have absolute control over our own bodies. If we don't have freedom in our own bodies to accept or reject any medical care, then we don't have any freedom at all.
Our next question comes from Candace Cole, a warehouse supervisor from Wheatfield, and she is also in our audience and here to ask it herself.
Hi. My 4-year-old son Eric was killed at a babysitter's house when they left a fully loaded handgun unsecured and easily accessible to children. My daughter, who was 7 at the time, walked in and had to find her brother. We have no legislation to hold irresponsible and negligent gun owners criminally liable in situations like this. It's also interesting to note that more than 60% of school shooters got their weapons from their own home or that of a family or friend. Would you support and would you sponsor a bill passing safe storage laws, also known as child access prevention laws?
Senator Donnelly, you're first on this.
Well, I believe in the Second Amendment, but I also believe with rights come responsibilities. And the storage law is something that we need to look at. What we also need to do is stop the gun show loophole as well. That somebody who leaves the prison right here down the street in Westville, they can go out as a felon and get a gun, go to a show, pay $500, get this gun or that gun or an AR-15. You can come from the big house in Michigan City and get a gun. I was at Noblesville West that afternoon. I was with the families and the police. And we have to make sure that on this kind of issue, things like no fly, no buy, if you're on the terrorist watch list, you can still get a gun. Mike, we have to make it that there are some standards, that we have to be responsible, that not just rights but responsibilities as well. And the things you're talking about, we have a red flag law in Indiana. I'm sorry, it's just such a complicated issue.
It is. It's
and
hard
it is
to
not
put in 60
a one-minute
seconds.
issue.
I know.
And we have a red flag law in Indiana that's exceptional. Okay.
Okay. Thanks for not making me use my mom voice. My daughter said, use your mom voice. You can do that. Mr. Braun, your chance to answer this question.
Any violence or tragedy with a gun, tears at your heartstrings. I mean, we all agree with that. I think when it comes down to how do you actually solve the problems, I would look at school security being as something that Indiana, I was part of the state legislature, we've done a good job there. The other thing you've got to look at would be whenever mental health, comes into play. I think we get a lot of cues and we don't do anything with it. When it comes to things like storage and so forth, I think the places where we've tried to use gun laws generally impact the folks that are law-abiding. I'm going to be for anything that proves effective to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. I'm going to always be there to defend the Second Amendment rights, because so often politicians and liberals end up going there, not the source of the problem. I was the individual here that's getting the NRA endorsement, and proud of it, because I think they want to make sure your Second Amendment rights are never infringed.
Mrs. Brenton.
Candace, as one mom to another, I am sorry for your unimaginable loss. I see my own 5-year-old flashing through my eyes, and I'm grateful that my husband and I are responsible gun owners who keep all of our guns locked. I think that's an important step, that, as Senator Donnelly said, with rights come responsibilities. We shouldn't have to pass laws to do this, people. This is common sense. And to have someone as trusted as your babysitter be the one that created such a tragedy is unbelievable. I'm going to call a little bit of BS, though, on the gun show loophole, because I've been to gun shows, I've bought guns at gun shows, and they've always done a background check on me. Second Amendment, very, very strong in the Second Amendment. I think it's absolutely important that we understand the reason the Second Amendment there is it is liberty teeth. Never forget the reason that we have the Second Amendment is because the political attitude of the day was one where we were fighting the global superpower of the day. Should that ever happen, God forbid, in our country, we need to be able to stand against government.
Senator Donnelly, quick rebuttal.
Our children ought to be able to go to school safe, study safe, come home safe. Over 90% of Hoosiers think that the gun show loophole should be ended. Over 90% of Hoosiers think that no fly, no buy should be in place. Think of a terrorist who is not allowed on a plane, but can buy a gun right here. I am so brokenhearted for you. And I saw your T-shirt with your child on it. And boy, just as adorable and as beautiful as as your child could possibly be.
We have another voter lined up. Let's turn our attention to international affairs now. This question will be asked by Niova Karakatsani. She's a professor of political science, and she's director of the honors program at Indiana University, South Bend. And you're on Purdue territory.
Good evening. In his recent address to the UN, President Trump praised Kim Jong-un of North Korea for his courage and for steps he has taken, including the cessation of nuclear testing, the release of American prisoners, and the return of fallen American soldiers. Do you believe that Kim Jong-un is prepared to dismantle North Korea's nuclear arsenal and engage in unilateral disarmament? And what would be the most successful policy course the United States should follow regarding North Korea?
Mr. Braun.
Interesting, because all the problems that were laid at our doorstep were problems that were created over many decades. The senator that has been there for 12 years. The Obama administration basically had the policies that took us to the brink in several cases. I think it's very clear that with a new dynamic, regardless of what you think of the president's style, we've got movement on issues that there hadn't been any in a long time. My opponent here voted for the Iran deal, and that's where you gave them it was a huge amount of cash, lifted things off of their shoulders, and thank goodness that that was redone. When it comes to North Korea, I think he's changed the dynamic, and I'm glad he has. We've never been this close to actually something being done. And that's what you're going to get out of people that I think a little differently. Career politicians and the folks that have been there a long time, that's the difference between what I hope is a new breed of politician on his side of the aisle and mine that do real-world solutions, including fixing things on the foreign front.
Mrs. Brenton.
Thank you. You know, when I look at Trump and Kim Jong-un and what's going on in North Korea, does it remind anybody of the Austin Powers movie where they're like putting the nuclear warhead in the volcano and it ended the earth? Does anybody remember that, or am I just the only one that like loves pop culture? We have cartoon characters for world leaders. I think North Korea can do better. I think we can do better. Abdul asked me what I thought about Trump, and I said, you know, I really appreciate the fact that he's a cowboy. When you think about America, and there's a great book, by the way, called Culture Code. If you haven't read it, read it. And it talks about America in the respect of being cowboys and independent. I think that posturing by President Trump does let the leader of North Korea know that he may, if he doesn't unilaterally, find himself at the wrong end of one of our nuclear warheads. That does not please me. I do not agree with it. But I do think that the implied threat is there. I've been working with foreign exchange students now for a couple of years, some from predominantly Muslim countries. What that's done is give me absolute hope that teenagers around the world are working for a better world.
Senator Donnelly.
This is actually the perfect reason why you can't trust Mike Braun. In regards to Iran, they were 1 month away from a nuclear weapon. They had the materials. They had the technologies. We pushed them back over 10 years. And if Iran had gotten a nuclear weapon, we would have wound up in conflict with them. And you know who would have had to go? Young men and women from Terre Haute, in Richmond, in Angola, in Maryville, in Westville, would have had to go and fight. My job is to protect this country and stand for it every single time. Make sure that every threat is turned away. But at the same... I can't believe it got stopped.
The League of Women Voters are doing my job for me tonight, and I thank them for it.
I'm waiting for
rebuttal.
You
have indicated, Mr. Braun. Yes.
Yeah. So, in talking to Hoosiers, the Iran deal was right up there with voting against tax reform. When you take a country that's been belligerent, that its mission is to destroy Israel and to export terrorism, and you deliver them $1.5 billion in cash and give them concessions up to $150 billion, that's not a good deal. How can you trust people that have never been trustworthy in the past? That dynamic is changing, and the senator says he's for what was done before.
To wrap. That was quick. I mean, you responded like that. Thank you. Senator Donnelly, you want a rebuttal as well.
Think of what Mike just said. Iran's now 10 years away. They were 1 month away from a nuclear weapon. And if they had gotten it, our kids would have had to go fight another war. That's why the Iran deal was done, to make sure that our children didn't have to go to war, to make sure that our kids could stay in Terre Haute and in Muncie instead of having to try to take after Tehran.
Mrs. Brenton, rebuttal?
Very quickly. What you just told me is they were 1 month away, now they're 10 years away. We've kicked the can down the road, not handled the problem with a real-world solution, and that means that our children are still going to be dealing with this, and my grandchildren. That does not please me at all. We should be keeping American troops in America. While we're busy defending the borders of other countries, our own border has holes big enough to drive semi-trucks full of illegal aliens through. The security theater that I recently experienced at the Indianapolis airport, ridiculous. Never caught anybody. Sorry, Homeland Security, but I'm getting real sick and tired of, may I have your papers, please?
I, too, have a question on foreign affairs. Let's talk about American leadership on the international stage, including our relationships with our allies. How would you define where we've been, where we are, and where we are going? Mrs. Brenton, you're first.
I think the first thing that we have to do is go right to the Founding Fathers playbook. Friends to all, allies to none. It's the entangling alliances that brought us into World War I and World War II and, the Vietnam War. It's the entangling alliances which put our sons and daughters, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters at harm. American troops should not be fighting those wars. Why in the world are we giving money to foreign governments so that they'll be at peace? What is it, like 10 million a day to Israel and 8 million a day to Palestine? I mean, how do we even do that when at home we have people who are not eating? Food security in our country is absolutely an issue, and we should be talking about feeding our own people first before we start handing out money to foreign governments in the name of peace. It has certainly brought us no peace.
Senator Donnelly.
I support President Trump's efforts. I want him to be successful. Because when the president is successful, that means the United States is successful. That's what this is supposed to be about. I was found by the Lugar Center, Senator Richard Lugar, a Hoosier icon, to be the most bipartisan senator serving in the United States Senate. And so we want to work together so that President Trump is successful. But I will also tell you this. We have to make sure that our military has everything they need to be successful at every turn, that they have the equipment they need to be safe, that they are never, ever in a fair fight. You can't trust Mike because he wants to cut defense spending directly against what Secretary Mattis says, that the first and biggest pay raise, the biggest pay raise in 9 years, he would have been against. We want to stand with our men and women who, if we do go into conflict, that we have their back.
Mr. Braun, our relationship with our allies.
So it was clear it wasn't very good leading up to it, and one reason it wasn't is because they weren't doing their fair share of the burden. President Trump came along, and where had you ever heard the discussion about their paying their fair share, the 2% that they were supposed to do? That's changed. Thank goodness he's taking on some of this stuff that others were either too politically correct or just unwilling to do. So I think what we've got is a new dynamic there, but it's based on somebody that's thinking outside of the box. When it comes to military spending, I mean, we've got more veterans per capita in Du Bois County, I think, than any other place in the state. I'm always going to be for making sure that the military has what it wants. And what about the VA? Where has the senator been? Where has the devotion been to take care of our veterans?
Check the new facility in northern Indiana.
Check what you've done up to this point, and finally, you now are at least getting common sense things done, like not having to travel 150 miles to get a basic checkup. You've been there 12 years. You can take credit for it, but you've not had one original ID in the time you've been there.
Well, you're really struggling on this one, Mike. I served on the Veterans Committee for 6 years. We were able to get a new facility in north central Indiana. We have a new facility going up in Terre Haute, Indiana. We have a new facility going up in west central Indy as well. I've been to all of these facilities. I've been to the VA facilities time after time to make sure our men and women have what they need. We just passed new legislation that provides that our veterans, if they're more than 40 miles away, can get coverage right at home. Just send the bill to the VA. And I was also the sponsor to make sure that if there's any problem with the bill, that it doesn't affect their credit at all.
Okay, we're moving on now. We have another voter question. This one on education. We hear from Lisa Kovacs of Portage. She is a technology specialist with the Office of the Registrar at Purdue University Northwest in Hammond. Lisa?
Thank you. What, if anything, can Congress do to increase higher education degree attainment while reining in excessive student loan debt?
Senator Donnelly, you're first up.
One of the first things we can do is make sure we protect our Pell Grants, which have a maximum of $5,920 and that are extraordinarily helpful for middle-class families. It can make all the difference for middle-class families. I'm also a sponsor of a bill. IU, a great school in our state, they have a policy. They send you a letter at the beginning of your semester, and it tells you exactly how much you have borrowed, it tells you how much you will borrow. It tells you what your payments are and what they'll be after you finish school. Student borrowing dropped 20% after they did that. That's a phenomenal idea that we're working to get into law right now. I will tell you this, when Mike was in the legislature, that was before he quit the legislature and went home, he voted against an in-state tuition freeze. I mean, what could be more important to middle-class families than knowing tuition's not going to go up? That's about as important as it gets, to know that your kid can finish school without tuition increasing.
Mr. Braun?
Career politicians speak in platitudes. I want to cite a specific example of Mitch Daniels. When I interviewed him first year on Ways and Means, this is how you fix the cost of education and the fact that it's now going up at a higher rate than the cost of health care, and that's sad. I asked Mitch, I'm proud that you've frozen tuition at Purdue for the 3rd year. I said, what are you going to do to try to keep costs actually down? And like somebody that's done something in the real world, he rattled off 3 things that were impressive. Going to make sure that we buy things right across all locations. That's what somebody in business would do. Going to make sure that we look at our benefits program to make sure it's sustainable, that you're not only getting good coverage, that you're also going to be able to afford it. And then he said, I want to make a 4-year degree a 3-year degree. That is going to be the difference between somebody like me and somebody that's been there as part of the problem. You think out of the box, and if you come away with anything this evening, that should be it.
Mrs. Brenton.
Can we talk about free market solutions and take out the government involvement? Everything government does makes us poorer. It's like they take, a liter out of blood in this arm and they put back 10%. It's just insane. Government is currently picking winners and losers in our higher educational system by guaranteeing student loan debt that you can never bankrupt out of. It's an absolute scam, it's a ruse, and it's a big gift to banks that they can be so profitable on the backs of every single one of us. I've been doing mortgages since 1996, and here's what I discovered. You think we had a crisis back in 2008, 9, and 10? You ain't seen nothing yet. When I try and get people, young people qualified who want to have the American dream and be homeowners, they simply can't qualify because their student loan debt is higher than a mortgage. It's absolutely insane. We need free market solutions, and I often tell my own children, consider trade school because they're not outsourcing electrical jobs to China.
Mr. Donnelly, you indicated rebuttal.
I do. Mike had a shot to help every family in Indiana, but you couldn't trust him to do it with an in-state tuition freeze. I want kids to finish in 3 years too. I think that would be awesome. But the fact is not everybody does. But I'll tell you what, if you freeze tuition for all of them, it helps them in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And maximizing Pell Grants does as well. It's your pocketbook. It's our kids' pocketbook. It's saving money, and that's what we should do.
And you're up for the next question as well, but rebuttal, Mr. Braun.
So when it comes to the cost of education, we all want that to be great service and low cost. The difference is going to be the senator's been part of now student debt that's gotten to $1 trillion, part of a system that's delivered us all these annual deficits. Can you really trust somebody that's been there, and do you deserve to have a shot at it when you've been part of the problem? All I'm saying is if you want more of the same, Joe's your guy. If you want people that are going to really fix things, that have done it in the trenches, you ought to try something different.
Pre-existing conditions, they were mentioned right off the bat, so we have a question from the Debate Commission in that regard. There is a court battle underway to take away patient's guarantee of insurance company for pre-existing conditions. Do you believe insurance companies should be required to provide such coverage? And if so, do you believe the companies should be able to charge higher rates to people with those conditions? And Mr. Braun, you're first.
Great question. I've spent 10 years in my own business taking on the whole issue of the high cost of insurance. 10 years ago, health insurance companies kept coming in. You're lucky. It's only going up 5 to 10% a year. I did it before Obamacare. And I want the public to be absolutely clear about this. I would never be for any replacement of the Affordable Care Act unless it covered pre-existing conditions. And it didn't have any cap on coverage. But to get that to be done and to be sustainable, you got to do things like we did. We broke the cost curve. And my insurance costs less, far less, than the comparable Obama policy. And that's because government always wants to do stuff, but they never worry about the cost of it. Until you get entrepreneurs and people that have done it in the real world, I wouldn't count on career politicians to do it. They've delivered us the mess.
Mrs. Brenton.
The problem with healthcare, just like anything else, is that we are disconnected from the cost of it because there's an unseen hand and force moving in our markets, one which we can't control, except at the voting booth, by the way. If you want something change, if you want something new, you've got to vote for Lucy and vote for me and support me because I'm the only one that'll get rid of all of this crap. Here's the problem. Government inserted itself into healthcare in the 1960s. Prior to that, we had doctors coming to your door. Now what do we have? We have out-of-control costs. We have aspirins that cost $1,000 each. Of course it's difficult to have that conversation about pre-existing conditions when we're still worried about $1,000 aspirins. The whole system must be overhauled, but it's clear that government is not the one to do that. Individuals in the free market must be the ones who make the decisions about their own health care. There must be no government force in this. There must be no government mandate to buy anything, because the next thing that they'll be mandating is that you buy Ford over Chevy. And who wants that?
Mr. Donnelly.
I stand here proudly before you and all the people of Indiana to tell you I was the deciding vote that saved coverage for pre-existing conditions. For that young girl who has asthma, is on the bus in Fort Wayne and needs an inhaler. For that child who has diabetes in Merrillville and needs insulin. And Mike, I can hardly believe that you could sit here or stand here and tell everybody you're for coverage for pre-existing conditions. There's a lawsuit right now, Texas versus United States, that's trying to take away coverage for pre-existing conditions, trying to take away or reimpose caps, and you support it. Stay and stand here tonight and tell us you'll denounce that lawsuit. You'll denounce that effort on pre-existing conditions. I was the deciding vote to make sure that that child in Lawrenceburg who has arthritis can get the Enbrel they need, even though they're part of a single family. That medication, that's $2,000 a month. Everybody gets a shot on my health care.
Mr. Braun.
So you can see he got riled up here. And the reason is
Darn
it was
right
Obamacare. And those goals that the Affordable Care Act had in place, 100% for. But it's got to last. You cannot just try to solve something without worrying about how to make it, sustainable cost-wise over time. I am always going to cover pre-existing conditions and no cap on coverage, and I'm the only one here that's had the nerve to take on the insurance companies and get it done. You've delivered us Obamacare, which is falling apart despite it was doing good things. It's not lasting.
Mrs. Brenton.
What is this really about? This is really about the old parties, whether they wear a red jacket or a blue jacket, trying to force and make you do something that may not be in your own best interests. Should we even have a government that is able to use government force? It's the tip of the government's gun, which is in your face, demanding that you buy health care. This is just one example of a product. It's a slippery slope. We have to take back our power as voters and vote out the people who would steal from your pocketbook, who would force you to buy things that aren't in your best interests.
We have the tyranny of the clock here. We have a final question that we need to get to. So you get to start. Mr. Donnelly.
Can't you give me 15 seconds? She got
15 seconds.
15 seconds.
Yes.
Hoosiers, clearest difference. He won't even denounce the lawsuit that'll take away your coverage for pre-existing conditions. I'm the person who cast the final vote to make sure your child with asthma can get their inhaler.
Final question, Mr. Donnelly, you start. Give us your best.
I'm sorry, final question.
Final question. This is a 30-second question. Short, sweet, and to the point, 30-second answer.
Is this also our closing?
This is the closing.
Okay.
Yeah. Your best elevator pitch on why you feel you have earned the votes of your fellow Hoosiers. 30 seconds.
Promises made, promises kept. Fighting for your health care when others want to take it away. Fighting for your jobs, 70 consecutive months of increased job growth. Fighting for our veterans, for our POWs, for our MIAs, fighting for our country, faith, family, community, country. It's not about R or D or red or blue. It's about the red, white, and blue.
Mr. Braun, your final pitch.
So what you ought to take away from this is, do you want more of the same? If you're happy with business as usual and the results we've had, here's your man. Look at our records closely and don't listen to Chuck Schumer, the guy that's been running his campaign with negative advertising and lies. Look at our record from when we started years ago and what we've accomplished. I've done things in the real world. This gentleman is a career politician that's part of the problem.
Mrs. Brenton?
I'm the only outsider. I don't have a $90 million net worth. I'm not part of the 1%. So if you want something that changes in Washington, D.C., if you want somebody that is unabashedly for the Constitution, who demands all of your freedoms all of the time, someone who has never raised taxes on you and never will, that is not in my track record. These two gentlemen, they're part of the problem. And you know, here's the problem, and here's your decision. We can either drain the swamp or we can send in another alligator.
We want to thank the candidates for being here. We want to thank the audience and our voters, and those of you at home, a reminder that tomorrow is the last day to register to vote. So many issues we couldn't get to, but there is another debate October 30th from Indianapolis, so you'll want to tune in for that. Thank you,
And
PBS.
we want to thank the moderator. Great job.
Thank you.